Everyone talks about what Georgie Cooper did after his dad died. The sacrifice, the tire shop, the kid who held a broken family together with nothing but stubbornness and a high school dropout's work ethic. But here is the thing nobody says out loud. By the time any of that became visible, Georgie had already been doing it for years, and not one person in that house was counting. Here is what the narrative of young Sheldon wants you to believe. Georgie Cooper is the dumb one, the dropout, the guy who got a girl pregnant at 17, fumbled through his 20s, and somehow stumbled into a tire empire while the rest of the family was busy producing a Nobel laureate. The show codes him as comic relief from the jump. Big shoulders, small vocabulary, always one punchline away from proving Mary right about him. But here is the thing. The sacrifice everyone credits Georgie for, holding the family together after George Sr. died, supporting his grieving mother, raising a newborn while managing a business, that's not even where it started. That's just the part that finally became impossible to ignore. The actual sacrifice started years earlier, in broad daylight, while everyone was looking directly at him and seeing nothing. Let's start with what Georgie actually walked away from. He dropped out of high school. The show establishes this, and most viewers file it under, yeah, that tracks, he's not the smart one. But think about the timeline. He leaves school and starts working while Sheldon is being driven to college at 11 years old. While the family is scraping together money to send a 9-year-old to a university physics seminar, Georgie is bagging groceries. While Mary is sewing Sheldon's name into matching outfits for his academic decathlons, Georgie is doing door-to-door sales. Let that sit for a second. This is not a kid who gave up and quit. This is a kid who looked at his family's financial reality and made a calculation. He couldn't be the genius, so he'd be the income. He couldn't earn the scholarship, so he'd earn the paycheck. Nobody asked him to do this. Nobody held a meeting. It just became true, quietly in the background, while the whole house orbited someone else. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The family's response to all of this was not gratitude, it was not even acknowledgement. Mary's running description of Georgie, to his face, to her friends, to her church, to anyone who would listen, was that he was not bright. The Cooper family consensus, as early as his teenage years, was that Georgie was the one who wouldn't amount to much. While he was working, while he was contributing, while he was doing the one thing that kept the lights on and the pressure off the rest of them. She wasn't wrong that he wasn't academically gifted in the way Sheldon was, but she was using the wrong measuring stick entirely, and Georgie knew it. The show makes this clear in small, devastating ways. He has a sharper read on people than anyone in his family. He knows when he's being underestimated. He knows exactly how the room sees him. He just keeps showing up anyway. Which brings me to the part that actually broke me when I started putting it all together. Georgie was also doing something that nobody ever named. He was being the buffer. Not in the dramatic sense, not the way it becomes visible after the funeral. I mean the daily, invisible kind. When neighborhood kids gave Sheldon a hard time, Georgie absorbed the social fallout of having a brother who was genuinely impossible to be around. When Sheldon's eccentricities made the family the subject of local gossip, Georgie was the one walking those same streets, hearing it. His whole social life was colored by the fact that his little brother was the town's most famous weirdo, and he never once held that over Sheldon's head. There is a version of this story where a teenager in Georgie's position turns bitter, where the resentment curdles into something real. And honestly, given everything the show shows you about how little recognition he received, it would have been completely understandable. But that version of Georgie doesn't exist. The Georgie the show gives us is someone who took all of that, the low expectations, the invisible labor, the constant proximity to someone who consumed every resource in the building, and just kept going. Not loudly, not dramatically, just kept going. Here is the thing about quiet sacrifice. Nobody counts it. That's the whole problem. When someone screams that they're drowning, you notice. When someone treads water for 15 years without complaining, you just assume they're a good swimmer. The Cooper family did not see what Georgie was doing. They saw what Sheldon was doing. Sheldon's needs were loud, urgent, documented. Sheldon came with receipts. His discomfort was visible. His requirements were specific. His progress was measurable. Georgie's contribution didn't come with any of that. It just quietly existed, like infrastructure. And then George Sr. died. And suddenly the infrastructure everyone had been standing on for years became visible, because it was the only thing left. Georgie was 17. He became the oldest person in that house, not technically an adult, not emotionally prepared for any of this, and he did not leave. He stayed. He took the family house, the only real asset his parents had, and he used it as collateral on a bank loan to buy a tire shop, because that was the only path forward he could see. That's not a business decision. That's someone gambling everything on the only option available. And when it works, and it does work, nobody calls it brave. They call it lucky. Because the story they already decided about Georgie doesn't have room for brave. Sheldon, meanwhile, was in California. Sheldon was at Caltech. Sheldon was publishing, theorizing, building the academic career that would eventually win him the Nobel Prize. And the money that made that possible, the stability that kept his mother afloat while she fell apart in Medford, came from the tire shop, came from Georgie. And here is the part that still gets me. Mary never told Sheldon any of this. She let her youngest son live in California for years, believing his older brother was basically a footnote. Georgie's sacrifices were invisible to the family in real time, but they were also actively kept invisible in retrospect. Sheldon didn't hear the story of what Georgie had done. He heard the same story Mary had always told, which was that Georgie was the one who hadn't amounted to much, which is why the confrontation in the sibling realignment hits the way it does. That's the Big Bang Theory episode where adult Georgie and adult Sheldon finally get in a room together and say things that have been unsaid for decades. Georgie isn't angry in the way you'd expect. He's not raging. He's tired. And he says something to Sheldon that is maybe the most precisely written line in this entire franchise. He says he was protecting Sheldon his whole life, that what Sheldon experienced as cruelty was the rough edge of someone running interference for him, someone absorbing the things that would have broken him. Sheldon had no idea. And that's the real tragedy buried inside all of this. It's not that Georgie suffered. People suffer all the time and find a way through it. The tragedy is that he suffered invisibly, under a family narrative that actively misread what he was doing, and the person he was doing it for never knew. By the time Sheldon finds out, they're adults. By the time any of this becomes legible, the years are gone. Georgie builds the tire empire. He raises a daughter. He holds a family together that should have come apart at the seams. And somewhere across the country, his brother is telling people in Pasadena that Georgie once peed in his shampoo bottle. That's not a punchline. That's 15 years of invisible labor reduced to a joke about personal hygiene. That's the most accomplished act of erasure in the whole franchise, and nobody did it on purpose. That's the part that should keep you up at night. Georgie's sacrifice wasn't stolen, it was just never seen. Not once. Not by the one person it was mostly for. The tire shop is still standing. The family survived. Sheldon got his Nobel Prize. And Georgie got a text mention in the acceptance speech. That's what invisible looks like when it finally gets counted.